sounded extremely like the bell that we start with. It's good to see all of you this morning, especially if you're visiting with us. We're glad you're here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We are not embarrassed by that. In fact, we encourage your questions. And sometimes people think we're going to ask a foolish question, but the only foolish question is the one that you don't ask. So feel free to ask them, and we'll be glad to study with you. I need to turn my mic on, I believe. And we're ready for Lesson 7 this morning. We're talking about it, and we've got Lesson 8 ready to hand out if you haven't gotten one yet. So they're here on the front.
Anybody need 7?
And Lesson 8 will be the end of our 3 months that we spent on this. Well done. Okay, we got those handed out. Was it you, Almond, that used to say at the end of your class, you may now pass out? We've got those passed out, and we'll finish with Lesson 8 next week. And we're trying to order some literature that's out of print, but hopefully we can get it in time. But today we're talking about church leaders' wives, and Brother Gary Jones is going to lead us in prayer before we get started. Amen. I hope you read the first paragraph in the lesson that says there's a story about 4 preachers discussing the merits of the various translations of the Bible. One liked the King James best because of its simple, beautiful English. Another liked the American Revised Version best because it was closer to the original Hebrew and Greek. Still another liked the NIV because of its up-to-date vocabulary. The 4th minister was silent for a moment, then said, "I like my mother's translation best." Surprised, the other 3 men say they didn't know his mother had translated the Bible. "Yes," he replied, "she translated it into life, and it was the most convincing translation I ever saw." Bibles, and that's kind of the concept. We're representatives of Christ. And this verse that we're talking about this morning, there's just one verse dealing with this subject, and it's verse 11 concerning the wives of leaders in the church. And there's a lot of discussion about who's intended here. But verse 11 says, women in like manner must be grave, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. And there are three possible views. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're mainly interested in those qualifications than we are getting sidetracked over these different views. Some believe this is talking to all women, which would seem unusual, right in the middle of giving qualifications for elders and deacons, to put that in there for all women. And these are good characteristics, good qualities for all women, and I believe the Bible teaches all women should be attaining to these. No question about that. But these are some that one must have in order to be qualified. And so the context is talking about church leadership. The second view is it's talking about another office in the church known as deaconess and a woman deacon. That's not supported by the original languages, and we don't find this practice in the early church. There was one woman, Phoebe, who is named, and the word for translated servant appears there, which is also the same word for deacon or deaconess in her case. And the third view is that it's talking about the wives of church leaders. And I guess there's a fourth view that is only talking about the wives of deacons, since it's mentioned in the context of deacons, and that could be true. But we're mainly interested in these because they are all qualifications that women ought to attain to. And a lot of translations of the Bible take this view, like the NIV and the KJV and the King James and others. But it's included here along with the qualifications for deacons. And so let's look at it. Verse 11, I'm reading in the American Standard Version, 1 Timothy 3, verse 11. Women in like manner must be grave, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Well, there's not many words there, but it covers a lot, doesn't it? Especially that last one, faithful in all things. Covers everything, doesn't it? And so, one of the things that a wife like this does for a deacon or an elder is what? What? Supports them, encourages. That's the word I'm looking for, since we're talking about encouraging leaders. God has given them a built-in encourager, hasn't he? Because they're both working toward the same goal, and they both have some qualifications to meet. And what better help can a deacon have than to have a faithful wife, or an elder to have a faithful wife, and one that supports him in that, encourages him, and they're working together on the same things, doing the same things, and working toward a particular spiritual end. So that's something to think about. And we mentioned this. We made the point a man or a woman can make or break a man, and this is very evident in church leadership because these wives are helpers. They assist. There are some things that deacons particularly are going to need assistance with, and elders too, and their wives are best suited for that. What would be some of those things? Is what? Okay, hospitality would be one. Certainly, she's good in that department, usually better than he is. And we usually equate that with cooking. It's more than that, isn't it? John?
If they're involved in any kind of counsel or support, the woman has a totally different view.
Okay, that's true. And as we look in Acts chapter 6, when the Grecian widows were being neglected, the word there translated servants, the same word translated deacon. I don't know if these were officially deacons. They may have been. But the point is that they were here are men taking care of widows, and it's good to have a woman to help in things like that. There are some things that a woman will understand about other women that men probably won't understand and may not think of. And so it's good in situations like that. Anything else that you can think of? Counseling younger women as well, not just widows or older women, but younger women. There are situations that a woman better understands another woman. And so she can come in, be a valuable asset in situations like that, and maybe in some cases even being the main one taking the lead there. So this is why we say that a woman can make or break, because deacons' wives are helpers. And here's some areas where she's especially helpful, and those don't need to be minimized. And so Paul lays down these 4 requirements for deacons. And let's take a look at the questions we've raised. Got your questions on the last page. And we discussed the 3 different ways the verses has been interpreted. But look at number 2. How can we know if these are just good suggestions or if they're required? Must be, okay. Kind of hard to argue with that. Must be. It's kind of like the same in elders. Must be the husband of one wife and all those other things there. So these are required. So in some way, when they're being appointed, that the elders will know whether they meet these qualifications or not. And so men who qualify as elders and deacons form the greatest class of men on earth today, I believe, and their wives as well, because their work is that of constant service. They may have to go into action on a moment's notice. It may be at the worst possible time. Could be middle of the night. And so they not only need to study, they're going to be needing to study on a regular basis, and not in some ivory tower, because these are not just honorary positions of wearing a title, but they're involved in daily life, aren't they? John?
Just by way of full disclosure, I think must be is inferred and has been supplied, at least in my translation.
Well, that may be. I didn't check that.
But there are 2 musts in, with the elder, in verse 2 and verse 7. And then he says likewise, he leaves out the must, likewise. So these are must things too, that they're likewise.
So must is included in the likewise. Whatever applies to them applies here. Okay, that makes good sense. I think we can see that. So all of this, when we think about the daily life that an elder and a deacon live, and they're having to apply God's word to various situations, and they put in hours of toil, and they give evidence of the genuine greatness that marks these characteristics. You get a person that meets these qualifications, you've got a good person, the best kind of person on the earth. Since none of us are perfect, and none of these are saying that they must be perfect in the sense of flawless, they're not going to be that. They can be perfect in the sense of mature. And often the word perfect is used to mean mature. And so the same thing goes for the women who meet these qualifications in verse 11. As we notice the next question, number 3, how is this passage an encouragement to deacons? Well, they've got somebody they can talk to about their work here, which is very helpful. What? A helpmate, yeah. And it's encouraging to know that God has planned for them to have help. And God thought of everything. And we see that here. And how does it help a deacon? Okay, you need to encourage one another. It's not just a one-way thing, is it? Okay. Encourage one another. And certainly that's true. It puts them on the same page, doesn't it? They're working together on the same thing toward the same goal, sharing the same goal. And that's encouraging that God has seen, God has the wisdom to show that they need help in doing that. This next question deals with the first requirement there, discuss the first requirement for these women. They're to be grave. We might talk about what that means as well as what it does not mean. Serious, okay. Certainly serious about the Lord's work. And anything else? Dignified. So they're not flighty or giddy or anything like that. Does that mean she goes around with a long face? Or a countenance that reflects that kind of idea? It doesn't mean that. Does it mean she can't have a sense of humor? Doesn't mean that. She's still a normal person. She's a human being still. But especially when it relates to spiritual matters, the Lord's work, this describes her.
A little more precisely, is
Worthy of respect.
Dignified, I guess so, but that doesn't quite say it. We're worthy of respect. And it's the term for the deacons too.
That's right, and I ran off, printed me a copy, not for everybody else, but a copy of all the translations on this verse and for that word. And the King James has serious. American Standard has grave. Amplified has worthy of respect. Some say worthy of respect, and several use the word grave, good character, honorable. Several different ways it's been supplied by the translators, but I think grave, we understand the word grave to mean serious. And it's in reference to the work she's going to be doing. And that is something, of course, that we mentioned is not a joking matter. So it doesn't mean she can't have a sense of humor, but need to have it at the right time and not at the wrong time. And certainly discussing some of these matters we've already mentioned, we can see that. As we mentioned, it doesn't mean she goes around looking sad all the time. She can be cheerful, she can be hopeful and earnest. And if she's going to fulfill the role of encourager, she will have to have a positive attitude, won't she? She's going to have to be a positive person, so she's not a dull person. The word grave shouldn't be looked on as meaning dull and uninteresting and sad and long face and sober like, let's see, which group was it in the Bible? Stoics. And she's not stoic. Almond?
The noun form gravity is used for the elders in verse 4. One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity.
Okay, all gravity. So there again, you see it. And so we see that especially if it relates to the work that they're going to be doing. And so she has a calm, sensible demeanor. I hear somebody else? A calm, sensible demeanor in the things she does. And it's interesting to look at all these different translations to see how it's translated, because probably in some way all of those different terms describe this one particular quality of being grave. Any other comments about this one? Well, we notice further that American Standard has women in like manner always to be grave, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Why is it important to have wives that meet these qualifications? Okay. Support their husbands and those who serve in capacities like this, in looking after the needs of women, like the widows we mentioned earlier. They can perform for women that which men are not suited for, and they are best suited for it. So I'm constantly amazed when I come across things like this and see how wise God was. He thought of everything. He thought of everything that we at best might think of as an afterthought. But he thought of it ahead of time. Yes, Alma?
It seems to me in the first three qualifications of both deacons and these women, the wives of the deacons, that they are told three not things alike. Because there are some knots for elders, but I just want to comment about this second term for the deacons and also for the women. For the deacons, it's not double tongue. This word is used only one time in the New Testament. Now, it doesn't talk about elders being double tongued. It talks about them apt to teach, and that's about all it says about the teaching of an elder, that he's to be apt to teach. Not so-and-so in his teaching in a bad way, but here with the deacons, to start with, or his speech, not necessarily his teaching, he's not to be double-tongued, which means sometimes he says the right thing and sometimes he says the bad thing. But in the case of the wife, it's all bad. He says not slanderers. The Greek word is not devils.
Yeah, devil, the word devil.
It's used only one other time too, in Titus 3:2-3, about the aged women are not to be devils, but teachers of young men. But
Yeah, the word slanderer is the same word for devil, right? Yeah.
that's wholly a negative thing. She's not even double-tongued. Paul is afraid that the wives of deacons are going to be bad in their speech, especially in affecting their husband to be bad too. And then the husbands will be double-tongued, not quite so bad. The word devil is used for the elders twice in verses 6 and 7. It says, lest he fall into the condemnation of the devil. But not the devil himself, but fall into the condemnation of the devil. Then verse 7 says that he fall into the reproach and snare of the devil, but he's not called the devil. Hardly ever is anybody in the Bible called Satan or the devil, but in this case, the women are, the Greek says, not diabolo, not devils. So he's really afraid these women will be worse than everybody else in this chapter, and therefore a bad influence on their husband, so they have to get that right to start with.
Okay, and that could be a possibility of the nature of the work they're going to be doing, that they may be more susceptible to that temptation. I think we see in the Bible certain temptations, certain sins that are often more connected with one gender or another. I think we see that. The subject of modesty is usually referenced to women, and this about misuse of the tongue doesn't mean that a man can't be immodest or can't misuse his tongue, but it's addressed to women. Then there's some that are addressed to men. A man's not to look on a woman to lust after her. A woman can lust too, but it's addressed to men. And we have several verses like that addressed to men. Jim?
To me, when you think about why is he pointing out the wives of deacons, I think you have to put it in context. I speak this by permission and not as the man. But the work of an elder generally would be that of spiritual guidance for a congregation, and of course, in some cases, spiritual guidance to individuals, but generally, they're leading the flock. Where a deacon deals more with the physical needs, like you mentioned, that type of work, where a wife and deacons, they may not be of age that an elder may be. So you may have younger wives and all. You're going to be going into people's homes, and so the last thing you want, your wife helping you take food to a widow, and the wife looking around and say, oh boy, she keeps a bad house, and everything, everything's filthy or whatever, and telling everybody that. She needs to be someone who although is young, she comports herself in a manner that is great. She doesn't go about paddling about everyone's personal affairs or whatever that they're tending to. So a deacon is going to be more on a personal level. Therefore, he needs a wife that understands. We're looking after the brother or whatever. I think that's the reason he's pointing that out here. Because they may not be as mature, but you know, in age, but you want to be sure they're mature in attitude and in their perspective of the Christian work. So I just think that's why this is pointed out.
Well, I believe you're right. She's not a fault finder. She's not going there to look for faults. Obviously, sometimes situation may be that the house is a mess because the person is sick and not able to do what needs to be done. They don't have anybody to help there. So that would certainly be true. But in regard to these requirements, we've pointed out that she can still be cheerful. I want to mention this again, and hopeful, and not to be confused with gloominess, but she's calm and sensible. And this qualification that we're talking about now, that we're talking about, not slanderers, she's not to circulate false reports, or as we learned in our Wednesday night class, John's been teaching on attitudes in there, that anything that is hurtful to another person, even if it's true and is not necessary to be told, if it's being told, it would classify as slander. Not to circulate any kind of a report like that, and because gossip is injurious to others. And we have this particular thing mentioned in connection with women. We're going to notice another passage in just a minute where younger widows were encouraged to marry and not to become busybodies and going about from house to house, telling tales and things of that kind. So the reason it's important for wives to meet these qualifications, because in a lot of situations, they're going to be looking after the needs of other women, whether old or young. Sometimes young women need someone to talk to them about certain areas. And another woman is best suited in those situations, I believe. And I believe that's why God did this. And also, the woman, we think of the woman as being the nurse for her children, and because of that, they're in a better position to care for those who have needs that may not necessitate being hospitalized, but they may still need certain kind of care that a woman could best give another woman. So do we see the reason for this? I think we can see a reason why God has done this. He thought of everything and things that we are just discovering. So when we look at this next qualification, and we talked about the similar qualifications for deacons. Deacons are to be grave as well, not double-tongued, pure conscience, all of that. The idea of being not double-tongued really is something that ought to characterize all Christians, shouldn't it? And the same concept is they're not to be double-minded, not to be double-tongued. We don't talk out both sides of our mouth. And one of the things that James warns about in the use of the tongue is that talking out both sides of your mouth, isn't it? Where you're saying one thing to one group of people and another to another group of people, and it boils down to hypocrisy, what it is. Well, what about this second qualification? What's the danger if a leader's wife, whether elder or deacon, doesn't meet this qualification of not slanderous? Okay, it opens up a whole area that can be very troublesome, doesn't it? It may cause division. Divisions have started like that. Turmoil in the church, that's a terrible thing. John?
It's already been stated that the word is the word for devil, but the New King James has a footnote there that this can be translated malicious gossips. So this is not just slipping up and accidentally passing something on that you shouldn't have. This is out of a motive of malice.
Okay. So there's a wrong motive involved there, isn't there? So she must be mature. She must be beyond that to where that's not going to be a real temptation to her.
The word devil, diabolos, with the devil himself, is because he is the great slanderer. slander him to God, etc. And so, Paul could have said, spread tales or lies or things like that, but he used the worst word for it because he believed that the wives of the deacons would be jealous of their husbands not being elders and trying to push them politically into something bigger, and so that generally they are devils. Now, the New Testament hardly ever uses language like that for anybody.
Yeah, it's a stern warning, no question about that. And there are all kinds of possibilities of some terrible things that can happen if these qualifications are not met. So don't minimize these qualifications just because they're limited to one verse and 4 things in particular.
And look also how that, in the case of the elders, almost nothing is said about, bad speech. He's a higher level, and a higher spiritual development. He doesn't have any office above him except an apostle or Christ. So he can't be jealous, and his wife can't make him jealous of any higher office in the church because he has the highest office, and almost nothing is said here about his wife being bad at all. But in this case, it really plays it up because this is the second guy in the church, and I think it's jealousy everywhere because pushing to be an elder, and her pushing him to be an elder. That's my viewpoint about it.
Okay, well, we appreciate that viewpoint, and certainly one to keep in mind because,
How else would we explain the different tone between the elder and the deacon and the wives?
well, that's true, and we have these here for a reason, and they're a must, as we've already pointed out. We're here at Stone Ridge. We're blessed with a number of godly women that want to do better. They want to grow, and it speaks well that they want to have a ladies' day coming up, a Bible study coming up in June. That's a good thing, and all women ought to be wanting to grow like that, and we appreciate the fact that they're planning such a day, and no doubt some of these things may be discussed in their particular classes that they have. But malicious gossip, as mentioned here, that can create division, hatred, suspicion, confused judgment, uncontrolled speech. They're uncontrolled by unrestrained passions such as anger, jealousy and bitterness, wounded feelings, pride, all of those things. And a malicious gossip is one that spreads rumors and innuendos. A lot of times people use innuendos are tricky things. You can kind of get away with saying something that you didn't actually literally say, but it was implied in what you said. So innuendos, we need to think about those. They imply things. And criticism and outright lies, all of these things. And so, as we mentioned earlier, one gender may be more vulnerable to these than others. I think that's kind of what we're saying here, and there's some that are certainly men are more vulnerable too. So when we think about the kind of God that we serve, and we're trying to be like him, we're trying to be fitted for heaven, we have to get past those things, and those are potholes and pitfalls that the devil has placed there. And any way he can get his nose in edgewise, he'll do it. And so we've got to be on the lookout for him all the time. And but we were talking about women being good caregivers and things like that. Also, when we think about prospective offices in the church, or elders or deacons, if his wife is prone to these things, then he doesn't need to be a deacon, because he has access to some sensitive information that doesn't need to be spread and often needs to be contained. And so that makes it a very vulnerable situation. Did I see another hand? Somebody else? Almond, go ahead.
I don't think we realize that the word devil was not a translation of a Greek word. It really is the Greek word, but in
I bless you.
after it's used, if you want to translate devil, well, like say, Satan is a Hebrew word, and the translation is the adversary. And that would be in English, the right way to translate it. And in this case, it should be the malicious slanderer. That's what the English, that's what would be the English equivalent. But since the word's been transliterated into English, then we just take it as devil without thinking about the basic meaning. And that translation could have put a footnote there that this means the malicious slanderer, but it's the one and only malicious slanderer. So when you get down to verse 11, they are not to be devils. It means, yes, it means to be malicious slanderers, but since the same word is used, they are devils. And that would be a transliteration, but the translation in all three cases, if you're really going to put it in English, would be malicious slanderers.
And the devil is said to be that to the brethren. He's said to be a slanderer of the brethren.
The word devil is a transliteration of the Greek word here, not the translation of it.
Well, that's true. In the New Testament, one of the beatitudes Jesus gave is, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the sons of God." That's one that doesn't need to be forgotten, especially in a situation where we're talking about elders and deacons and their wives. But God blesses those who make peace with others, not those who stir up strife. And so he expects us to speak truth in love. That's the general rule. We're always to speak it in love. And sometimes it may get to be a warm discussion. We've seen that happen. But the ideas of healing wounds and to mend broken relationships. So this is the demeanor of one we're looking for here. A malicious talker, however, isn't concerned with fairness or with healing wounds. We mentioned that women make better caregivers. They're healers in that respect. And they're not interested in striking back or tearing down or venting anger or entertaining evil thoughts. So we can see the reason for these particular qualifications. Even if a prospective deacon doesn't have this problem, if his wife is prone to it or vulnerable to it, I say prone, I don't mean she's got to do it. But if that's the case, then he's not to be a deacon. She may disqualify him in that respect. And so, well, any other comments about that before we talk about that, Kathy? That's right. This is a must. And let me emphasize again, don't minimize these because they're contained in one verse and there's only 4 things mentioned. These are extremely important. Yeah, and he may, there'll be times when he needs a womanly advice. Teddy?
You know, in all of this, as we discuss it, it's important never to discount the wife's influence upon her husband's behavior. And you can go all the way back to the garden and see
Yeah.
Ahab and Jezebel. You know, not that Ahab needed a lot of influence because he was bad already, but still she made it worse.
Yeah.
The case of Solomon, there were his wives, and his concubines drove him away from God. You know, these are all matters of character that we're talking about. You know, a woman of good character will make her husband better. A woman of bad character will make her husband worse. I think this is a really classic example of a man working together with this.
Those are good points, certainly, and they illustrate the nature of a proverb. That a proverb is a general truth. There may be exceptions, and I think about the one, whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor of the Lord. But Ahab didn't find a good thing in Jezebel, and neither did Solomon and all of his wives that led him off into idolatry. And certainly not Herod when he found Herodias. He didn't find a good thing. So there are exceptions to that, and I'm glad Teddy mentioned that because those are very important to these qualifications. The third qualification, what does it mean to be temperate? Is what? Self-control, yeah. She's void of being impulsive. She doesn't need to be an impulsive person that acts first and then thinks about it later. But she thinks about it before she acts. And so she doesn't have a temper that flares. She's not that kind of person. She's well controlled in her actions. And she's not given to excess in anything. She is temperate, moderate. Back in the early part of this century, there was a group of women called the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And they were very active in trying to enforce prohibition because of the evil effects of alcoholic beverages, things like that. And they were calling for temperance. They were calling for self-control. And that's the idea. And so as we think about temperate, we think of somebody who is calm and sensible, don't we? And not radical, anything like that. They have balanced judgment. There's a real need for that, for good judgment, balanced judgment. Freedom from excesses or extremes, anything like that. Indicates a person that does not distort judgment or conduct. They're mature Christians, they're stable, they're circumspect, they're self-restrained, they're clear-headed, all those things. Almond?
This is the same Greek word for the bishop, right after the husband of one's life, vigilant. But then, Paul in his case was sober right after because they don't have to be drunk, but sometimes acting as though one, we're not. We're drunk, etc. And notice also in the case of the deacon, what's the third phrase here for the deacon in verse 8? Not given to much wine.
Yeah.
So except for maybe the last term, the first three are almost the same for both the deacon and the deacon's wife. Be grave and not double. He's double tongued, but she even goes farther because she is a malicious slanderer. And then he's not to have much wine and she's to be sober.
That ought to tell us something, shouldn't it? Yeah. So what all this is saying is that she's not to be of such a nature that she undermines the work of her husband as a deacon. And certainly that can happen. We'll finish this up next time and get into lesson number 8. And lesson number 8 may take a little longer. There are more questions and more examples that are dealt with.